What if the greatest spiritual battle humanity faces has never truly been about light versus darkness? What if that story, while meaningful, is still incomplete? Because perhaps the deeper question is not, can humanity recognize evil, but rather, can humanity hold consciousness without collapsing into fragmentation? Because if we step back far enough, history begins to look strangely repetitive. Civilizations rise, advance, expand, become powerful. And then, somewhere along the way, they begin consuming themselves, not always through invasion, not always through catastrophe, but through fragmentation. The same patterns return again and again. Hierarchy, domination, superiority, extraction, greed, identity fixation, fear, control. The names change, the flags change, the technologies evolve, but the nervous system underneath the behavior remains remarkably familiar. From a higher consciousness perspective, perhaps racism and the many isms humanity wrestles with are not isolated problems. Perhaps they are recurring manifestations of the same unresolved lesson, the same fragmentation pattern, repackaged in different forms. Sometimes localized, sometimes global, sometimes obvious, sometimes hidden inside institutions, ideologies, or identity structures, but always asking humanity the same question. What identity are you capable of evolving into? Because identity is one of the great spiritual assignments of the human condition. Not merely race, not merely nationality, not merely religion, but identity itself. What stabilizes your sense of self? What gives you value? What makes you feel safe? What do you become when fear enters the room? There is an old saying, you can tell a great deal about a person by the condition of their home. Perhaps civilizations are judged the same way, not by how loudly they proclaim morality, but by what they normalize, what they reward, what they extract, what they fear, what they project onto others. A civilization reveals its consciousness through its systems, how it treats the weak, how it handles difference, how it responds to power, how it behaves when resources become scarce, how it manages fear, because systems are externalized psychology. Many spiritual traditions hint at this idea in different ways, that the universe is not merely physical, but educational, a testing ground for consciousness. Not in the simplistic sense of reward and punishment, but in the deeper sense of evolution through experience. Civilizations encounter power, technology, resources, identity, fear, and the question becomes, can consciousness evolve fast enough to handle what it creates? History suggests this is not guaranteed. Many civilizations throughout history collapse beneath the weight of the same unresolved dynamics. Greed without restraint, power without coherence, technology without wisdom, identity without integration. Ancient myths across cultures repeatedly speak of previous worlds, previous ages, previous civilizations lost through imbalance. Whether symbolic or literal, the message echoes with strange consistency. Consciousness that fragments under power eventually destabilizes itself. And perhaps this is why so many speak of the Age of Aquarius, not simply as a mystical era of peace and enlightenment, but as an age of exposure, an age where hidden fragmentation becomes impossible to ignore, where humanity's unresolved patterns rise visibly to the surface. Racial tensions, identity wars, psychological instability, information chaos, manipulation systems, extraction systems, technological acceleration. Everything intensifies simultaneously, not because humanity is becoming uniquely evil, but because consciousness is being confronted with itself at scale. The old buffers are weakening. Narratives that once stabilized civilizations are cracking. Inherited identities are becoming unstable. Systems built on superiority and extraction are being questioned publicly in ways they were not before. And this creates turbulence, because fragmentation resists exposure. A fragmented psyche does not want to confront itself. Neither does a fragmented civilization. So not from the perspective we've explored throughout this series, racism is not merely prejudice. It is one manifestation of fragmentation, stabilized through hierarchy. A psycho-spiritual structure built around superiority and inferiority. One identity regulating itself through elevation. Another identity burdened through imposed reduction. But racism is only one expression of a broader human tendency. The same pattern appears through nationalism, class supremacy, religious domination, ideological extremism, even technological elitism. Humanity repeatedly creates identities that stabilize themselves through comparison, because fragmented consciousness struggles to hold intrinsic worth. And this is where extraction enters the picture. Fragmented systems cannot stabilize internally, so they stabilize externally, through control, through domination, through accumulation, through extraction. Extraction of labor, extraction of attention, extraction of resources, extraction of dignity, extraction of life energy itself. The system consumes because it cannot sustain coherence from within. And the more fragmented the consciousness, the more power it requires to maintain stability, which is why fragmentation naturally seeks centralization. Control over information, control over technology, control over economics, control over identity narratives. Because unstable systems fear decentralization. They fear what they consider as unpredictability. They fear losing control over the structures protecting their fragmentation. This may also explain why humanity's technological ambitions increasingly carry existential undertones. Not merely improving human life, human existence, but transcending humanity itself, escaping mortality, escaping emotional vulnerability, escaping biological limitation. But perhaps the deeper question is this: is humanity trying to evolve or escape itself? Escaping itself, like a fish building godlike tools, trying to own an entire ocean, to feel safe in its warmth. Because there is a profound difference between transcendence through integration and transcendence through avoidance. One path deepens wholeness. The other path amplifies fragmentation with more sophisticated tools. And maybe this is the true spiritual assignment, not becoming gods through technology, but becoming whole enough to wield power without collapsing, to hold intelligence without collapse, to hold differences without fear of invisibility, to hold internal turmoil without projection, to hold shadow without building systems around it. Perhaps the universe keeps returning humanity to the same lessons, because they remain unfinished. The costumes change, the language changes, the scale changes, but the curriculum remains strangely familiar. Can consciousness stabilize itself without needing superiority? Can societies organize themselves without requiring extraction? Can humanity encounter power without becoming consumed by it? Because maybe civilizations are not ultimately destroyed by external enemies. Maybe they collapse when fragmentation outpaces consciousness, when intelligence expands faster than wisdom, when technology evolves faster than emotional maturity, when power scales faster than coherence. And maybe that is why this moment feels so intense. Humanity is approaching thresholds previous civilizations may also have approached. Thresholds where consciousness either integrates or destabilizes itself through the very tools it creates. Perhaps the deeper question is this: what kind of consciousness can survive power without losing its soul? Because civilizations are not ultimately remembered by how advanced they became, but by whether they evolved enough internally to survive their own creations.